right, let's go ahead and get started. For July, we are covering our buyer forms. We're going to move on to our last form that we're going to cover today, which is our cancellation of contract. So now we've talked about our contingency for the sale of the buyer's property. We've talked about our buyer contingency removal forms. We've talked about our notice to buyer to perform, right? Super important there that we always are notice to seller to perform rather. So for any action that's not done in the contract that we want to cancel because the seller's breach of contract, we have to serve that notice to seller to perform. But if the buyer wants to cancel the contract within their contingency rights, or they've served that notice to perform, we can use this cancellation of contract, disposition of deposit, and cancellation of escrow. It's a three-part form. So, in accordance with the terms and conditions of the purchase agreement, you're going to put the date on the upper left-hand corner, the first page of that purchase agreement. It might be in other form here. It's usually related to the purchase agreement. You're going to put in the property address, buyer's names, seller's names. The first section is the advisory and instructions. The party canceling this agreement is required to act in good faith. Disputes over cancellation and deposit can be complex legal issues that can be expensive to resolve. Agents are not qualified to provide any opinion on who is entitled to the deposited funds or whether a cancellation was made in good faith. Buyer and seller are advised to seek the advice of a qualified California real estate attorney regarding this matter. The party canceling the agreement and not the agent needs to determine if a cancellation right applies. Cancellation must be exercised in good faith and in accordance with the rights and procedures within the agreement, including any applicable notice to perform or demand to close escrow. Section 1 allows for either party cancellation or for a proposed mutual cancellation, which becomes effective upon mutual execution, Section 2. If there is an open escrow, escrow holder will need mutual agreement and instructions from both parties regarding the deposit and canceling of escrow. If the parties agree on the release of the deposit, then the parties can exercise mutual instructions with full release in paragraph 2C below. If the parties are canceling this agreement but are disputing the deposit, then the partial release section can be used in paragraph 2D. Parties are advised to consult with a qualified California real estate attorney regarding potential damages and remedies, including but not limited to retaining the deposit, seeking other monetary damages, and pursuing specific performance. Any dispute will have to be resolved in a manner specified in the agreement, which is usually arbitration and mediation. Now, keep in mind that I might have an opinion that, you are within your rights under the inspection contingency to cancel, but there's always a possibility that the seller may feel like the buyer did not act in good faith and go after their deposit. Okay, so keep that in mind. That's why we have to be careful at telling buyers that they're going to get their money back. Okay, both paragraphs 1 and 2 are escrow instructions to escrow holder. Cancellation under paragraph 1A requires the signature of either the buyer or the seller, but not both. That means if my buyer wants to cancel this contract, they can check the box, we can cancel the contract. That doesn't mean they're going to get their deposit back, but we don't need the seller's signature to be canceled of that contract. Okay, paragraphs 1B and 2 require the signatures of both parties to be effective. Cancellation of contract, one party cancellation. This paragraph is used to cancel the agreement by buyer or seller. Its terms apply whether or not both parties agree to the disposition of the deposit and cancellation of escrow in paragraph 2 below. You're going to check who's doing the cancellation. Is it the buyer or the seller? And why are they canceling? Section 1 is as permitted by good faith exercise of paragraph blank of the agreement. So you're going to go back to the purchase agreement. You're going to be like, here's the paragraphs that reference the inspection contingency or the loan contingency or the appraisal, right? Whatever it is. Buyer has failed to remove the applicable contingency or taken applicable contractual action after being given a notice to buyer to perform. That a seller would check that box. So buyers usually cancel. We're going to check boxes 1 or 3, which is either as permitted or seller has failed to remove the applicable contingency or taken applicable contractual action after being given a notice to seller to perform. Okay, if a seller is providing cancellation, they're going to use box 2. Okay, and then either party can use 4. The other party has failed to close escrow after being given a demand to close escrow. Or there's line 5 other. Okay, so buyer or seller boxes get checked. Buyer's either going to select box 1 box 3 or box 4. Seller, if we check this box, the seller is going to select either 2 or 4. Okay. B is proposed mutual cancellation. The buyer and seller signing below proposes a mutual cancellation of the agreement. The cancellation is only effective if the agreement is reached by both parties. Sign in paragraph 2 below as follows. This proposed mutual cancellation may be withdrawn by the party initiating it at any time prior to the agreement of the other party in paragraph 2. Below, it shall be deemed revoked unless by 5 p.m. on the third day after it is signed by the initiating party in paragraph 1, or by blank date and time it is signed by the other party in paragraph 2, and a copy of this completed form is delivered by the initiating party. Most of the time, it's not going to be proposed mutual cancellation. Okay, most of the time, it's going to be one party's providing the cancellation. When do we use mutual cancellation? And if I'm in contract, I've got a listing and you're a buyer's agent, and buyer decides that they don't want to move forward because of something in the inspection or whatever, or they just get cold feet, and you check the box for proposed mutual cancellation, I'm going to kick it back to you and go, this isn't proposed mutual cancellation. The seller doesn't agree to mutually canceling. The seller wants to sell the property. So just make sure it is proposed. When might proposed come into play? I have sent over a proposed mutual cancellation before when we agreed that the seller would do no repairs. We had an inspection report that came back with way more damage than we were anticipating. And so we did a request for repair. And I said, hey, like, I know we agreed to no repairs, but my buyer's going to cancel because here's where we're at. So they're asking for a credit of X amount of dollars. So here's the repair request and here's a cancellation with proposed mutual. I'm okay with whatever you guys decide you want to do. Okay. If you don't want to agree to the escrow, we can just cancel it and call it a day and move forward with another house, another buyer, or we can move forward with the credit. So I have done it that way as well. The other proposed might be like maybe the seller is taking mercy on the buyer. The buyer is having problems with their loan. They lost a job or something, and they're saying, hey, yeah, like, let's just cancel this and set you free from this contract, right? This is kind of like the mercy section is B. Okay. Whoever's canceling the contract is going to sign in this section here. Okay. This is paragraph 1. So whoever's initiating this form, even if it's proposed, somebody's going to be initiating it. Okay, so whoever agent fills out this form for them, they're going to sign here. Sign section 2 solely for cancellation of contract. Oh, sign in this section solely for cancellation of contract. Proceed to page 2 for disposition of deposit and cancellation of escrow, right? Escrow can't cancel until we know what we're doing with the deposit. So section 2 is the disposition of deposit and cancellation of escrow. Purpose of paragraph 2. This paragraph is used to instruct the escrow holder to cancel the escrow for the purchase, sale, or other designated transaction for the property and what to do with the deposit. Any cancellation of contract pursuant to paragraph 1A remains in effect even if both parties to the agreement do not sign below. So we can still cancel the contract even if they don't agree. Okay, B is to be release of funds not automatic. The release of funds by escrow holder pursuant to paragraph 2 requires mutually signed release instructions from buyer and seller, judicial decision or arbitration award. A party may be subject to civil penalty of up to $1,000 for refusal to sign such instructions if no good faith dispute exists as to who is entitled to the deposited funds. Okay, that's a really good paragraph to point out to the other agent if they're having problems getting this form signed. C is the options for the release and disposition of deposit. We're going to select one of the options in C or complete D, but we're not doing both. So either one option in C or section D. Buyer and seller cancel escrow. You're going to put in the escrow number there and the escrow holder's information on that next line. The parties mutually release each other from the obligation to buy, sell, or exchange the property under the agreement. They mutually release each other from all claims, actions, and demands that each may have against the other by reason of the agreement and intend that all other rights and obligations arising out of the agreement are null and void. Then we're going to select one of these. The seller authorizes the release of the buyer's deposit to buyer less buyer's fees and costs already incurred and agreed to in the contract to be paid through escrow, including any escrow fee. If checked, seller agrees to pay for buyer out-of-pocket expenses for inspection reports and appraisal fees as specified in the agreement. Buyer shall deliver receipts for such expenses to escrow holder. So I get this question a lot because they're like, okay, well, which box do I check, Amy? For the most part, it's going to be C1. Seller authorizes the release of buyer's deposit to buyer less buyer's fees and costs. Now, if the buyer doesn't have any out-of-pocket fees and costs, they don't have any outstanding invoices that are being held in escrow, then the buyer doesn't have any fees and costs. They're going to get their deposit back. Okay, this would just be like, oh, well, they didn't pay for their home inspection or they hadn't paid for the appraisal yet, right? Then that would be a buyer's fees or costs. And that's something already incurred. Okay. Um, this box here, we have certain agreements where the seller might agree to pay for buyer out-of-pocket expenses. Okay. I had this in my short sale that I did, right? I had an agreement with the buyer as representing the seller that we want to go ahead and have inspections done prior to short sale approval. And if the short sale doesn't get approved, I'm willing to reimburse the buyer for their expenses up to a certain amount. You also see this in the SPRP. There's a stipulation that if the seller's purchasing replacement property and buyer can start inspections immediately, but then the seller doesn't actually move forward with the sale of their property, then the buyer could be due some money back. So that's what this box is checked for. This already has to be part of your purchase agreement to check the second box under section 1. Okay. C2 is, so this is basically, hey, the deposit's going back to the buyer is C1. C2 is buyer authorizes the release of buyer's deposit to seller, less seller's fees and costs already incurred and agreed to in the contract to be paid through escrow, including any escrow fee pursuant to a properly executed liquidated damage clause. Buyer's authorization of the release of deposit seller is limited to no more than 3% of the purchase price if the property is a dwelling with no more than 4 units, one of which the buyer intended to occupy. Any additional deposit shall be returned to the buyer, right? So that's saying, hey, yeah, I failed, seller. You get my deposit. I don't want to move forward with this. I know we removed all of our contingencies. I lost my job. I can't complete this purchase. Take my deposit and let's go, right? So that's 2. C2 is buyer's deposit goes back to the seller. C3 is buyer authorizes release of blank dollars from buyer's deposit to seller. The balance to be returned to the buyer. Each party to pay for their own unpaid contractual fees and costs already incurred and agreed to in the contract to be paid through escrow, including any escrow fees. Such fees and costs shall be deducted from the amount specified above, right? That's, hey, we're splitting this somehow. Like seller's getting 1,000, buyer's taking 2,000, whatever it is that's going back to the seller, we're putting that money there on 3. So that's C3. C4 is, hey, there's no deposit in escrow. Each party to pay for their own unpaid contractual fees and costs, if any, already incurred and agreed to in the contract to be paid through escrow, including escrow fee. Like, there's no deposit to release because the deposit wasn't made, right? That usually happens at the very beginning of a contract. So that's section C. Any questions about section C? All right, D is partial release and reservation of rights. Buyer and seller cancel escrow number with blank. You're gonna put the escrow company there. The parties mutually release each other from any obligation to buy, sell, or exchange the property under the agreement. Reserve all rights to retain any obligations they have towards each other under the agreement, except for the obligation as applicable to buy, sell, or exchange the property. And this is just, right, we're not pushing anybody to buy or sell, but we're reserving the rights to like retain the deposit. Okay. Authorize escrow holder to hold any deposit until receiving subsequent mutual instructions, judicial decision, or arbitration award, or there is no deposit in escrow. Okay. So for the most part, we're going to come up here. We're going to fill out section 1. Maybe the buyer's canceling as permitted under good faith exercise of 14A. Okay. I think that talks about inspections. I could be wrong. Okay. We're canceling there. Buyer's going to sign up here. Then when I fill this form out, because I'm looking out for my buyer and my buyer thinks they're going to get their deposit back, I'm going to fill out the escrow number here. I'm going to fill out title company here. Then I'm going to say, hey, seller authorizes release of buyer's deposit to buyers, less the buyer's fees and costs. And then that's going to be cancellation. Okay, buyer's going to sign up here. Buyer's also going to sign down here, but I'm generally not going to sign this until my seller signs or until the seller signs agreeing to it. But let's say that the seller doesn't agree to this deposit. Who's going to get the deposit? Then we would fill out section D. We're going to put in the escrow number here. We're going to put in the title company here. That the seller wants to cancel this sucker because they want to be able to move forward with another buyer, but they think they deserve that deposit. So we're going to fill out this here. So my buyer said, hey, we're canceling up here in section 1. And then section D here in section 2, the seller saying, hey, I'm going to allow you to cancel the transaction, but we're going to authorize the escrow holder to hold the deposit until they get mutual instructions regarding what happens with that deposit. Okay, that effectively cancels the escrow. It's canceled on both sides. We're all agreeing that we're not going to sell the property to each other or force the other person to buy it. Okay, but we're not agreeing what happens with that deposit. Okay, that's when we use section D. Any questions about your cancellation of contract? All right, fabulous. Then that brings me to the end of our lesson today. And then starting next month, we'll return on Thursdays. This time, this link, we will be talking about all the seller forms. So things related to the sellers instead of the buyers. So we will see you. I'll see you in 2 weeks because I won't be here next week. And stay tuned for if we're doing a training next week or not. Otherwise, I will see you in August. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Yep.